Hey everybody, Jeremy Champa from Higher Learning Test Prep and Remote Tutors. Just want to talk to you today about a couple of the most important ideas in the reading section of the SAT. So recently I've charted out the styles of questions, sort of the way I talk about them, and I've noticed how many questions there are about purpose or function, and then obviously there's a lot of questions about evidence. So those are the two that I really want to focus on today. I'm also going to make a video about vocabulary and how to do those questions. But that's a little bit more straightforward. And I think there's more good information out there already about how to do vocabulary questions. I don't think there's a lot of good information out there about exactly how to do evidence sets and exactly how to do I'm sorry, not main purpose, but just purpose or function questions. So I'm going to screen share here with you. I'm going to look at two different exams, and we're just going to go through a series of these questions. Maybe we'll spend, I don't know, 10 minutes talking about evidence and 10 minutes talking about purpose or function questions. But literally, this is about like 10 questions per test, about sometimes as few as like 8. But really, there's about 8 or more evidence questions on every test. Because they come in pairs, right? So all it takes is 4 pairs for there to be an evidence set. That's not even a pair for every exam. So I think it'd be safe to say there's at least, or for every passage, I should say. So I think it's safe to say there's at least 8 of them. And then purpose or function questions. I was really surprised when I made my charts and went through how many questions are there that I would use this same strategy for. I found that there was at least 7 questions in every exam that I could use this for. So I mean, taken together, 17 questions about, out of a test of 52 questions, that's, more than a quarter of the questions and less than a third, just less than a third, just about a third. So that's a significant portion of this test for which most people don't have a really great handle on what to do. So let's just jump in here. I'm going to screen share. So pardon the Google Hangouts vortex that we must go through to get to the screen share. Okay, the test I have pulled up is test 1, and a lot of folks have some familiarity with this test, so I figured it would be a good place to start so we could look at some questions that you already might know about. Here's what I want to notice. I'm also going to just pull up my chalkboard. I'm just going to say a couple things that I want you to notice about evidence sets. First of all, I guess I'll just tell you how to do them. So in this case, we have questions 13 and 14 are an evidence set here. So like the question in 13 and the answers in 14. This is where to start. A, B, C, D, and 14. I don't care about the answers to 13 yet. A, B, C, and D, I do not care about these yet. All I care about is the question itself and the evidence. What I want to do is I want to own this question. I want to own it. And so when I say own it, what I mean is I want to be able to put it in my own words and really know what I'm being asked so that when I go up to these answer choices, I can really be clear and say, does this even have anything to do with my question? Does the question get even brought up here or here? So that's all I'm going to worry about. If it brings up the question in any way, right above or below the lines they give us or in the lines they give us, then I'm going to pay attention. If not, I'm going to cross it off. I don't want to worry about these answers because these answers are 13 because there's just too much going on at that point. To try to hold all that in my mind is too much. It really makes sense to focus, even if you feel like you can, even if you're like, hey, I can do that. I don't want you to. It doesn't make sense. I promise we can get into that in another video. But for now, just trust me that it makes sense to focus on the question. Make sure you really own it, own the particulars, and jump into the answer choices. So this question says the author indicates, or the authors indicate, 2 authors or more, that people value gift giving because they feel it. Okay, so where in these lines do we talk about people valuing gift giving? And it says the author indicates. So I could see people saying something about the value of gift giving or the sort of the lack of value of not gift giving. And that's another thing we can get into later, but indicate questions, questions that ask about suggest, imply, infer, indicate. I'm a little bit looser with my evidence because those words suggest, imply, infer, indicate might not be completely direct, but the authors say something or suggest something about gift giving. Let's look at these lines, 10 to 13. Many relish the opportunity to buy gifts. That sounds like valuing gifts. because it presents a way to build stronger bonds with one's closest peers. Okay, cool. That definitely talks about gift giving. Um, and if anything, strengthen a bond, strengthen a relationship. What was the exact language up here? Build a stronger bond. Okay, so that's gonna be that is gonna be the right answer, and it's not always that easy. But these first lines definitely talked about the value of gift giving, right? It said up here, many relish the opportunity. That's what does the author think that people, many, relish the opportunity, value gift giving. And it really worked for that. And this idea of strengthening a relationship really clearly mapped on to build bonds with one's closest peers. The thing you want to notice here, and I'm actually going to do this here so we can really get a sense of what's going on. I talk a lot about the way that answer choices map on to evidence. So let's just put these things on the board and show you exactly what I mean. Because you might just be like, well, that was an easy one, or he made that one look easier than it is. Here's what I want to notice. I want to provide you with a way of doing a question that's completely tangible. I do not want you to feel like you have like some rough idea of what's going on. I want you to get exactly what I'm doing. And exactly what I'm doing on these evidence sets is I'm looking for language that matches up and I should say like maps on really well. I like that idea. So these lines 10 to 13, starting right here, many, that's many people here, that clearly maps on to people. Many relish the opportunity. That's relish, even just the word relish, is value. And gift giving is the opportunity to buy presents. Because they feel gift giving offers a powerful means to build a stronger bond. So, build a stronger bond is perfect for strengthen a relationship, right? So, there we go. That's the right answer. And so what you're looking for in evidence after you've looked at, you start with this question, you go to these lines and you say, do they have anything to do with what the question asks? Then you see, can I literally draw arrows from these phrases to map onto an answer choice just perfectly? Things you want to avoid is exact language. Let's see if we could find one that uses exact language. I'm not sure if any of these do. 22, 23. That doesn't talk about value. And I really think this one's fairly simple. I'm going to move on for the sake of getting you guys a chance to look at really a difficult one. Now, I think maybe a middle of the road, sort of like decently hard, but not super hard question might be 16 and 17. It says the passage indicates, so again with this indicate, infer, suggest thing, that the assumption made by gift givers on line 41 to 44. Okay, so let's find out what those lines are. What is that assumption? Right? That goes back to really making sure we own our question. Gift givers equate how much they spend with how much recipients will appreciate the gift. The more expensive, the stronger the gift givers or the gift recipients' feelings of appreciation. Okay, cool. The assumption is bigger gifts are better. Let's see what the authors or the passage indicates about this assumption. So notice I'm really trying to own the question. What does the passage suggest about this assumption? We know what the assumption is now. Now let's look at 53 to 55. Let's see, does it talk about the assumption? Perhaps givers believe bigger gifts convey stronger signals of thoughtfulness and consideration. That is the assumption, right? So, okay, it does talk about the assumption, but it just says perhaps that's true. Perhaps they think this. I mean, like the assumption is that they think this. So that doesn't really map on anything because substantiated, which is the only one that's close here, substantiated means like provide substance to back something or to support something. That's just the statement. Again, we need evidence to substantiate something. So next line is 55 to 60. Okay, well, look, according to Camerer, gift giving represents the symbolic ritual, right? So what does this do? If anything, this substantiates the assumption. That doesn't end up being right, but it's close. You would say, okay, well, this one, if it's right, it goes with substantiated, right? So cool, we got that. But we keep going because it doesn't just, the last one I skipped over because the rest of it would have been fairly easy. In most cases, I'm going to read all of my options. So 63 to 65. Does this talk about the assumption? Remember, I own that idea, the assumption that gift givers think bigger gifts are better. Well, look, this talks about the assumption, right? The smaller and larger gifts representing smaller and larger thoughtfulness of consideration. And they don't think this. Gift recipients don't think this. Well, that would map exactly onto incorrect, right? And so I'm going to stop there because I think the rest of these, or the last set, let's see, let's just read it, 75 to 78. I think this is a good one to look at because it looks really fancy. Uses all this technical information. Fail to utilize information about their own preferences. Theoretical terms, right? So those answers are less likely to be correct because they're super technical sounding. We'll see an example of a hard one in which this technical kind of sounding thing is right. But notice this doesn't directly talk about the assumption that bigger is better. This says, people fail to utilize information when they're buying gifts. It doesn't say, is that assumption? I mean, it sort of indirectly says that the assumption must be wrong, but we want evidence to be absolutely direct. So I'm going back to my chalkboard here. I just want to put a couple things down. We talked about process. Process was, question first, go to the question, go to the evidence, and then try to map shit up with answers. So we didn't worry about the answers to the question. We started with the evidence itself. That process is important. It's also important to notice that, like, what should you expect in answer choices? One, mapping, which we just talked about, and we're going to continue to talk about all the time. Two, avoid or be wary. I'll just say beware of exact language. Beware of exact language. They will use exact language to if you just try to copy paste language on instead of mapping. You might say beware of copy paste, right? The idea that the exact language is going to show up in the answers means you wouldn't have to think about and translate the ideas, which is usually wrong. And then one other thing that I wanted to point out here was beware of things being super indirect. Right? Like you'd be like, oh, well, these lines say that people fail to make good decisions. And that would mean that the assumption that bigger is better is wrong because they're failing. Beware of how indirect that is. Beware of indirect. I mean, it can be a little bit indirect, but I don't see how that phrase would map on, to go back to our first idea. We really want to map onto an answer. That does not say anything directly about the assumption that bigger gifts are better. Right, so now we're going to go to we have two answers. We have substantiated, and we have evidence that matches that, and we have incorrect, and we have evidence that seems to match both of those here. So let's go back to those lines and make sure they both talked about the assumption. So now we're just going to think about, do these lines really say substantiated and incorrect? And honestly, this doesn't tell us directly that there's evidence that this assumption is, I mean, what does it even mean to substantiate an assumption, right? I mean, this gives us evidence to say that, like, how gift givers think, but that doesn't really substantiate the assumption. It certainly tells us, like, we understand why they think this, and maybe that's close to substantiate, but, like, this is perfectly direct. As for gift recipients, they don't think it's working. Bigger does not mean better. Smaller does not mean worse. Like, my decision here would be like, okay, well, even though this is somewhat close, I know the SAT pretty well, and I know they want it to be perfectly direct. This literally tells us, it indicates that gift recipients, that the assumption made by gift givers, which is that bigger is better, right? It talks about this assumptions, bigger and smaller gifts. And it says it's not better, right? So, I mean, maybe explained, but not as substantiated, right? There's a difference between those two words. and incorrect is a perfect match. So we're going with that one. All right, so I'm going to pull up another test because I want to look at a super hard evidence set. In fact, I'm going to look at two more evidence sets. I'm going to look at one from this passage. And this is an interesting one because, in fact, we'll come back to this one because that's going to transition really nicely into this idea of purpose and function. But first, let's just talk about this really hard evidence set, 49 and 50. Okay, so this is in April 2017 if you want to go find it on the internet somewhere. The question itself is, scientists who specialized in lignin were useful to Martoni and Estevez because. This is a super hard passage. But why were the scientists who specialized in lignin useful to these people who end up being kind of like the main people in the story? So let's go to these lines. Why were the scientists who specialized in lignin useful? Line 22. So I'm not worrying about the answers yet. Line 22. Martoni didn't set out to locate lignin in algae. Cool. But we're talking about just Martoni above there and below. We don't talk about the other experts in lignin. If anything, it's because Martoni wasn't trying to find it, right? That's literally what it says. We'll see if there's an answer that matches that. No. 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 Maybe this. And I think it's really important to say maybe. Like, don't say you have to feel like hardcore yes or no. Just be like, okay, well, if that's right, it's D. And it's pretty, that is pretty indirect, especially because it doesn't say imply or infer up here, right? So you can see my process is sort of about like, okay, was the question imply or infer? No. Okay, so this one's probably downgraded, right? At least maybe that's not that answer, but this evidence seems downgraded now. Doesn't seem like there's a good match. Maybe it's D though. Okay, now here's the other lines. This describes sort of the anatomy of the seaweed, calcified, rigid body. Okay, this doesn't really mention why they needed scientists. Like, I mean, again, maybe, but I really want to see why did they need specialists in lignin? Like above or below? Here's Estevez right down here. Now look, let's go to the next lines, 33 to 37, which is right below where we just were. Okay. 33 through 37, it says, when Estevez, so one of the guys, it said, why did Estevez and Martoni bring in another person? It says, when they examined the joints, they found secondary cell walls, commonly found in land plants. Now look, the next lines are the key. That prompted them to seek out experts in lignin. Okay, what prompted them to seek out experts in lignin? Literally the question was, why did they seek out experts in lignin, right? It was, why were the lignin experts useful to them? Well, if this is going to be right, it's because something about secondary cell walls commonly found in land plants. No. Perfect. Look at B. And I want you guys to pay attention to, I think there's one of these answers that is going to use exact language. But this one, this was the seaweed they were talking about. It maps on nicely to this idea of when they examined the joints of the seaweed, right? That's what we're talking about. We see features typically found in plants known to contain lignin. That's the tricky part because lignin, we learned up earlier in this passage, was something that that was found in land plants. So the mapping on is land plants maps on to this idea of plants known to contain lignin. That phrase right there. So that's a particularly hard one. I want to point out one more. Well, in fact, let's keep going because I think there's like one more tricky one in this evidence here. So 42 to 45. Yeah, this was the evidence that was close. It says John Ralph detected lignin in this group. Well, at least it talks about an expert. But like, why was this expert useful? I don't know. He like, um, there may be, this is some really fancy stuff down here. And then down here, honor, cool, great interest, biofuel and animal feed. I wonder if any of that stuff comes up in the answers. No, some of those ideas are floating around, but I think the most important thing to notice is just pay attention to what the question asks, and the lines that we used didn't quite mention the experts, but right below did, right? So expand your thinking out a little bit and look for something about like, why did they find experts in lignin? Literally, this sentence says the exact same, excuse me, the exact same thing as our original question. So these lines above, the word that, what prompted them? This stuff prompted them, right? And then we don't see exactly secondary cell walls. Notice we're not using exact language. Copy and paste is not happening. We're seeing features, contain features known to be in land plants, plants that contain lignin. So we're mapping on nicely here. I want to show you one more because I think it's really damn hard, and it shows is a great example of having to be very disciplined about our approach. That was the one I was starting with back here, 4 and 5. The character's behavior during the gift giving mainly serves to. The reason this question is a good bridge into our next topic is because it says mainly serves, and that's something we're going to talk about next. So let's find this gift giving, and let's use these lines, 43, 44, 44, 46. Those are right next to each other. Well, let's look above here. There is this gift giving going on. Oh, this is too much, with an air of one who had received a Kunor diamond as a birthday present. Come, come. It refused to be overawed by the generosity. It's nothing. So there's this gift giving going on. Here's the first line. It was nothing. Okay. So if it was nothing as the evidence of something, that would be not emphasizing lavishness, maybe inflating the significance, convey indifference. No, there's no indifference. They're both fawning over this gift. Maybe D, though. It was nothing. Really, if anything, goes with B. But 44 to 46. But they fussed and created the illusion that it was something unique, untasted, and unencountered. Okay. That would be inflate the significance of the gesture, right? It literally says, until it was something unique and untasted and unencountered, created the illusion, right? They fussed and fussed. They inflated the significance of the gesture. They created an illusion, right? The other lines are not going to talk about gift giving. So just based on the idea of the gift giving, the next is about something about feet, which I won't get into. But the rest of it is not about gift giving. So you can cross it off, right? And then it ends up being this answer. And I was really close to saying polite behavior because there's a lot of polite behavior in this passage. And what they're doing is being really polite. But the important thing I want you folks to notice is exactly the mapping on. They fussed and created the illusion it was something unique and untasted and unencountered. That's inflating the significance of a gesture. Even though they're being polite, nothing in those lines in the evidence maps onto the phrase polite behavior. I mean, fussed and fussed, sure, but like fussing doesn't necessarily mean politeness. They're inflating the significance of the gesture. They're making it seem like something untasted, unique, right? Unencountered. That's what we're noticing in evidence sets. That's exactly what we have to do on evidence sets. Okay, so I'm going to talk briefly now about the other major style, but I think I'm going to make a longer video maybe in the next couple of days. But now we're going to talk about purpose function questions. And this is kind of simple. It's like surprisingly simple how much this works. If you see phrases like in order to, or mainly serves, or literally just uses, these are the kind of things you want to pay attention to for purpose and function. And literally all you have to do is go directly above. So if these are the lines, go directly above and directly below. And the answer will be spelled out for you. You'll have to do the mapping thing still. you're not going to see exact copy paste language, but you're going to see something that's exactly here and here. If they pointed you to these lines, it's right above and right below. The description of Chotolama and the sun's interaction mainly serves to. Okay, so let's go find that stuff. By the way, you can use context here, like it's going to be after the answer to this stuff. So it's like somewhere in the 50s or 60s, maybe later. Here is the interaction between the sun. They stooped gently to touch the feet. Okay, so I guess we are getting into feet. And Sandeep's aunt and his mother's feet, a traditional greeting and a mark of, you could say obedience. It's not obedience, it's obeisance. Sorry. Anyways, the interaction. Oh, no. Struggling to keep the son's hands away from the feet. There's no need for all this. This was half a token gesture towards modesty and half towards the new modern India. So these lines right below the interaction are important. And then keep going. I have not met you for 2 years, Dada, said the son, struggling to get his hands near the toes. You must not stop me. This is all the interaction. Below it, this was half a token gesture towards modesty and half towards the old traditional India, Gandhi's India of ceremony and custom. Now, actually, this is probably, I think, I haven't done this question in a while, but I think these lines literally right below it are what matter. Sandeep, meanwhile, had come to the conclusion that grown-ups were mad, each after his or own fashion. Simple situations were turned to complex, dramatic ones. Not until then did everyone feel important and happy. Well, I mean, I guess if we go above, well, we had read those lines above. Okay, so we read above and below, and let's see. It's not misinterpreting Indian history. It's like the old lady is trying to be modest and new, free of ritual and religion. The young people are trying to be modest and old, right? So they're both trying to just help each other out and be nice to each other. Maybe A, not C. It's not become routine because they haven't seen each other in a while. We read those lines. But look at the difference between A and B, which are the two closest ones. Is it showing how they diverge in their approach to cultural practices? No, because they're both bending towards each other. It's showing a complex relationship, right? They're both like trying to act like the young people, the old people are trying to act new and modern and modest, and then the young people are trying to act old and ceremonial and traditional and modest, right? So it's complicated, right? And those lines above and below helped us here. I think I can pull this up on another test too when I look above or below. Ah, yeah, this is a really good one, really difficult one. This number 11 says the authors most likely use, right? So the previous one said mainly serves. This one says most likely use. Same style. They use the examples in 1 to 9 to highlight what? Okay, 1 to 9. Obviously, we can't go above that, but pretty much says people, well, I'll read it. Every day, millions of shoppers hit the store in full force, searching perfectly for the frantic gift. They spent over $30 billion. Aside from purchasing holiday gifts, most people regularly buy presents for other occasions throughout the year: weddings, birthdays, anniversaries, graduations, baby showers. Right below is what we're going to pay attention to. This frequent experience of gift giving can engender ambivalent feelings in gift givers. Now, by the way, the definition of ambivalent is described here, sort of implied here, if you will. But we're going to pay attention to this phrase, frequent experience of gift giving. Now, look, they mention a bunch of holidays up here, right? And all the money people spend, and people do this all the time, right? So, oops. People all the time pick this one because they mention all these holidays. But this frequent experience of gift giving maps on perfectly to A. You could be stuck between the two of them. You could easily think that this is right if you focused on lines 1 through 9. You go, oh, they mention all these holidays, right? Look, oh man, all these different holidays, all these times, not just holidays, but all these different occasions, right? And the holiday gifts and all this stuff. But go right below this frequent experience of gift giving that maps on absolutely perfectly to regularity with which people buy for gifts. Frequency, regularity, gift giving, people shop for gifts. Right? I'm just gonna scroll until I find another one of these and see if we can do exactly the same thing, just to prove a point. This will be the last one. I don't even know which one I'm gonna do. Evidence, not a purpose question yet. Here we go. I have no idea what we're talking about, but the last sentence of the passage mainly serves to. Well, let's see what happens. Hopefully, if we find an exception to the rule, that's fine too. But let's see what the last sentence is doing. Okay, is this really the last sentence? Just be clear. Yes, okay. All right, last sentence. New measurements of Ceres composition by NASA's Dawn mission, for which McCord is a team player, could help pin down its birthplace. Okay, well, what's going on above it? Well, I'm just going to read. It agrees the asteroid belt with some small refugees, but there's no reason to believe Ceres is a stranger there. Its ice to rock ratio matches the expected composition of raw materials. What's more, and usually it's just the one sentence above, what's more, objects of its size are expected to have formed in the inner solar system. So we don't know if it's from the outer solar system or inner solar system, and this could help pin down its birthplace. It's got to be this one. Allude to a potential resolution to a puzzle. Let's see. Hint at a possible weakness in a claim. No, because it's not a weakness. It's like, who knows? We'll find out. Emphasize the critical nature of a decision. It doesn't say anything about critical. Allude to a potential resolution to the puzzle. Right? That maps on. Pin down its birthplace. And the word could, so it's not a strong, and then help pin down its birthplace. So to me, I'm looking at that and I'm seeing, in this case, it really wasn't above or below too much, but it was mapping on nicely to this potential resolution to a puzzle. Pin down, and could means potential. Right? So above and below one is going to be the key here. I want to see if I can do like maybe one more. And then I gotta go. But let's see. Here we go. The figurative language serves mainly to suggest. So let's go to 33 to 35, and let's go above and below. So 33 to 35. Okay, so notwithstanding this, we are wandering on the great ocean of human affairs. I see no landmark to guide us. Let's go above. Disorders have arisen in other parts of America, but here, sir, no dangers nor insurrection have happened. Everything has been calm and tranquil. Okay, and then below us, we are running, we not know whither. Is that still part of our lines? Let's just be clear here. 33. Oops, I missed it. 33 to 35. So starting on 35, we are running, we know not whither. Just that means uncertainty. We are running, we know not whither. So once again, we could do that. And I just can't help myself. I'm going to do one more. Oh, okay. So this one. This will be the last one, I promise. But these are the two most important styles of questions aside from, vocabulary and main idea questions. These come up even more than main idea questions. So this is such a big deal. Even if it's like 7 or 8 questions, that's like, that's like 1/6, 1/7 of the test. That's a lot. 7 questions out of 52, more than 10% of this test. Okay, so why does the author use these words exact, specific, and complement in the final paragraph? Functions. You see use and function? That's the style of question. Look, let's go to 47 to 49, then go right above and right below. 47 to 49. Oh, I want to say there's something else. Oh, yeah, no, it's just 47 to 49. Okay, fair enough. I'm sorry. One more time. Sorry for being slow here. I thought these words showed up slightly different spot. 47 to 49. Okay, fine. Here's 49, and here's 47. Sorry, it took me a minute here. So if the actual order, I'll just go in the beginning of the sentence. If the actual order of the pairs could be written down, one could write down the exact order of the bases on the other one because of the specific pairing. So here's where it stops. It says, thus, one chain is the complement of the other. And it is this feature that shows how deoxyribonucleic acid might duplicate itself. So in this sentence, it is this feature, which is described up here in the lines that we were told about, is how DNA might duplicate itself. I just want to show you how easily this maps on. DNA replication. Deoxyribonucleic acid might duplicate itself. DNA replication. It's easy to pick some of these other ones. They sound super fancy. None of them really match. I mean, this one uses a lot of the key language you'll find above, but like above and below, you find exactly this mapping on DNA replication might duplicate itself. And that's the right answer. Okay, so I know we went pretty fast there, but I think we just saw like a good number of questions for which these strategies worked. Right? There's a couple of little exceptions where, okay, that second to last purpose question, we really mapped on, but we didn't use the above or below thing because it wasn't quite enough. But those are special circumstances, and it's okay to find those because you want to know that these are rules of thumb. These are ideas that you can use to help you. They're not absolutely, the only thing that you need to get these questions right. Obviously, you need to think and you need to read, but if you focus on, on evidence sets, we said read the question, then go to the evidence. Don't look at the answers to the original question. See if you can own that first question and ask yourself, how do these evidence lines or the lines around them deal with just what the question is asking? If they don't deal with that, they're wrong, right? And then we saw that once you found answers that are kind of close, look for the answers to the original question that work with these evidence pairings. And then you want to see, okay, one thing that we didn't talk about is going back to the question and be like, okay, does this really match on perfectly? But if you've owned the question, you don't have to go back and do that. If you own the question, now you can just say, okay, how do we map on this evidence set perfectly onto this answer? Do we actually see it mapped on exactly, or is it kind of too much of a stretch? And we said we could be a little bit stretchier with like imply, infer, suggest, indicate questions. So all good stuff. See if you can find ways to use that. Purpose function questions, much simpler. You just say, go above and below and look for key phrases that map on nicely. And the one thing that's true about both of those is that we're not talking about exact language. Beware of the copy paste. Beware of like overly technical, fancy sounding ideas. It's about reading. It's not about like theoretical understanding. So I hope that helps. Purpose function questions, evidence sets, huge part of this test. If you master those, you're going to do great. You're going to get a lot more stuff right, I promise. Hit us up if you want any more help. We're making videos all the time. We're happy to help out. So until next time, take care and happy studying.